Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and our latest foray into the listener questions mailbag. Over the next hour or so, we'll send some Americans to Wrexham, some more Americans, I guess. We'll analyse Napoli's transfer business and we'll discuss the idea of teams finding their level and being happy with it. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today is your friend, it's my friend. It's the Taylor Rockwell. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing wonderfully well, Taylor. How about yourself? You got anything else going on right now?
A little bit. We are. I will spare the details, but basically, we have to publish our Champions League review in somewhat short order. So I am editing as we record this episode, which I thought would be no problem until I realized that I do have to listen to your audio. So I'm going to be hearing you all talk while also hearing you all talk, and I might have an aneurysm. We'll find out.
Foolproof. This is a podcasting first. Listening to another podcast while doing a current.
This is like having to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time, which I can't do. Evidently,
it's. There's a hipster joke in here somewhere about, like, I'm actually editing a podcast while recording another podcast while listening to a podcast. I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Put a bird on it. Very good. I like it. Good stuff. Graham Ruffins here. Hi, Graham.
Hello, Ryan. How are you?
I'm wonderful. What are you wearing today, Graham? Tell us about it. People on the YouTube channel will be able to see, of course, what you're wearing, but what is it?
Right, so when I wore the mid-90s classic Barcelona shirt for the last episode we recorded, not a mention of it, but the white tee with no detail on it whatsoever. I have to explain what this is.
Well, that's rare for you to not wear an actual obscure soccer jersey, though, right?
It is rare, and you're exposing this.
It's
on...
the
Do you want me to
cost-cutting.
go put one on?
It's the cost-cutting Man United jersey for next season when Jim Ratcliffe can't be bothered.
It's the Jim Radcliffe limited edition. I did
numbers written in Sharpie. Yeah.
I did finally buy a Napoli shirt with McTominay's name on it the other day, so I'll wear that next week for you.
Yes.
Right, unless they've collapsed in the Scudetto race by then, in which case I'll pretend I never bought that. But Scott, I love that. I love that. You know the guy that's what you're referencing, right? The guy who shouts the names.
Yeah.
I love that. Scotto! And they all shout McTominay.
So there's a whole thing about Scott McTominay in Italy, and there's kind of this joke that they struggle a little to pronounce the names. So he's got quite a few nicknames with the Napoli fans at the moment. So MacGyver apparently is one of them, and also
that's easier.
Yeah.
What was the second one, Ryan?
McFratame, which is it's Neapolitan fratame, basically for brother. So it's basically McBro, but in Neapolitan.
I'm pretty sure that's a McDonald's coffee
That's
ice cream
awesome.
combination.
Yeah,
McFrat. Yeah.
McFrappe. Yeah.
McFrappany.
Yeah. There's a
With cream, please.
Yep.
It's some caramel syrup on top.
Graham's
That's
still getting paid by Big Cream.
Oh, there it is.
Oh boy.
Graham loves cream.
Always.
But it does seem like McTominay is learning the language, at least, because I've seen him interviewed in Italian. He's like, McFratame, that's my favourite one. I like out of all the millions of nicknames they've given me here because they struggle with my name.
I've heard that. McTominay, apparently, in Italian dialect is very difficult to say. So, McFrat or McFrappany or whatever it was. I'm happy with that. Let's
Just
get
go
on that.
McBro.
McBro works, somehow, for Scott McTominay.
Let's say hello to our very own McBro, Joe Lowry. Hi, Joe.
Hey, fellow McBros, what's up? I am better off for having learned all of this about Scott McTominay. I'm also eager throughout this episode, depending on how long it takes Taylor to finish the edit. I'm eager to just toss to Taylor and have him jolt back into the conversation, completely unaware of, well, at least mostly unaware of what's going on. I'm ready, fellas. This is going to be electric.
I'm looking forward to him responding to a point we made about Lamine Yamal on this episode as he listens to us on the other edit. That's definitely going to happen.
I just love the way we've been able to bend the space-time continuum and somehow record our Champions League show on Friday when, of course, we're recording this show on Friday.
I'm just maybe this is too much of how the sausage gets made. Before we started, I was like, "Are we sure we're going to get that episode out in time?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, it's going to be fine." I'm just interested to see how we're going to do against the clock here. I'm on pins and needles.
Thanks, Joe. So no pressure is what you're saying.
I'm just saying.
Joe's going to be 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then just a big klaxon.
We are cruising. Don't worry about it.
Good stuff. All right. Well, we'll let Taylor get on with his edit and allow his computer to overheat and explode very shortly.
Oh, buddy, it's gonna.
Oh, yeah. Before we get there, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show for our bonus content. Bonus content including listener questions extra. We've got an extra question going on the feed about the haves and have-nots of soccer. At what level do facilities get nice for soccer teams? It's probably the Premier League, maybe the Championship, but we'll answer that fully on the bonus feed. And, of course, bonus video there. And access to our Discord server. All the cool kids, they're hanging out there. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. Please and thank you.
If anyone is watching along and just saw the face I made, it's because I found the edit in the last episode in which Ryan hit his mic, and it was louder than I expected it to be. Whew. Okay. Anyway, back to the show.
I'm not an unprofessional person who'd hit their own mic. I picked up a coffee cup and a coaster smashed on the table. Thank you very much.
It was so loud.
Yeah.
That's more professional.
Sorry.
Apology accepted.
All right, let's get to our listener questions, shall we? Kevin Tolley has been in touch. Is it better that for the 25-26 season, Bournemouth and Milan are out of European contention? That way, at least 3 of the US's injury-prone first-team members for the World Cup are playing fewer games before the season starts. Now, we just need Johnny to move to Spurs, Dest and Tillman to do something similar, and Juve to start taking Quaaludes just before matches again and finish out the season with all draws. Yeah, I'm not sure about the Quaaludes part, but I'm also not sure about Milan technically being out of European contention, but I suppose they're trending that way. But Joe, less games is good, generally speaking, right?
I'm so here for this. Kevin, I don't know if you remember, I was team bubble wrap before Qatar in 2022. I was team, let's get these guys on what is that, Carbonite from Star Wars? Let's do that ASAP. Yeah. I am all for this. I am team no Europe ahead of 2026. I think it's a pretty compelling argument from Kevin that is sort of made in this question of the U.S. player pool is pretty notorious for being injured. Like the fact that almost all of the stars, bar Giarena, aligned at the 2022 World Cup was something of a minor miracle. It's been a little bit less of a concern since 2022, but 1 game a week is fine. It's plenty. These guys are probably going to be playing for their clubs. They don't need to be playing twice a week. We're at the stage of the U.S. player pool where things haven't really gotten better since the 2022 World Cup, right? I mean, I think that's one of the big disappointments of the last, it'll be 3.5 years when the next World Cup kicks off, is that reinforcements haven't really arrived. And that was a young team, right? So it wasn't as if they were going to come in droves and replace aging veteran players. That didn't really exist. But nonetheless, players really haven't come out of the woodwork for this U.S. team. We're still waiting for that next center back. We're still waiting for the next great central midfielder who really makes a play to pass over some guys in Yunus Musa and Weston McKennie who still are in sort of odd club situations. That hasn't happened. None of that stuff's happened. And the internal improvement hasn't really arrived either. But, I mean, at this point, it's probably not going to come in a major fashion ahead of the 2026 World Cup. So reduce the number of chances you have to injure yourself. Still keep yourselves fit. But, yeah, if I need to pull out the bubble wrap again ahead of 26, I'm absolutely ready to do so.
What do you think, Graham? Are you team bubble wrap?
It's in my notes here. I've got Joe is a big bubble wrap guy. So
is it actually in your notes?
Yeah.
Yes, let's go.
So I planned on referencing that discussion even if you hadn't, Joe.
Yep.
I think my opinion has remained the same since we had that discussion before 2022, which is, well, I accept your point. I think there's a balance where you maybe don't want players coming into a tournament completely cold. So
yep.
I think you want players still in peak fitness and match sharpness, and it's just obviously whether having them play European games is going to tip them over the scale. I think my answer is probably different for Tyler Adams and Pulisic, which is who Kevin sort of references in his question. I think for Pulisic, I remember reading this article a while back on how his injuries came when he was in and out of the team. And I think Lampard, I found a quote, Lampard was talking about this is from a number of years ago, of course, but he was asked about that article, and there was a quote in there where he had this logic that Pulisic was someone who needs to be playing basically every game, playing at full intensity, and his theory was that when he was in and out of the team and stop-start, that was maybe when he picked up injuries. And if we look at his Milan track record, where he's been one of their most used players in the last couple of seasons, I think he's going to tip over into 3,000 minutes for Milan in all competitions. In fact, he's already there. He's going to be like 3,500 by the time this season is over. He's not had the same injury troubles that he's had at Chelsea. He did have that injury earlier in the season, so I'm not saying he's had no injuries whatsoever, but we're not talking about long periods out that he's had at Chelsea. So that's mainly anecdotal. There might not be anything in that, but I'm not the first one to kind of raise that as a theory. For Tyler Adams,
wait, Graham,
If I
Go on.
could. But, like, Pulisic, if he's not in the Champions League, let's say, so he's just playing league matches and cup matches, like,
Yeah, he's still getting
theoretically,
that
then he's still
repetition.
playing every single game, right? I
Yeah,
mean, he
totally.
might not be. That might be the concern with Milan. But, like, so he is still then playing every single minute. He is still getting that regularity of appearances.
Yeah, he's still getting that repetition. I guess at that point, I just think it would be a bit sad that arguably the greatest American player of all time is taking a year out from the best competition in the world. Like there is obviously where everything's geared towards 2026, but there's still a joy to seeing an American player at the top of European soccer, right? And these are the best years of his career. He's in the best club situation that he's been in. So that would be a shame. I think for Tyler Adams, I am still a bit nervous about his fitness records, and I also think he's the sort of player who, if he comes into a World Cup absolutely gassed because he's played 4,000 minutes the season before, I think that would have a real impact on what he is in the team to do and what the US relies on him to do. And that's not to say Christian Pulisic, there wouldn't be an impact for him either. Like, if he loses a bit of explosiveness, he's not the threat that he is in the final third. But I think that energy is so, like, core to what Tyler Adams does that if we can take, like, 1,000 minutes off his total by Bournemouth not playing in Europe, then yeah, I'd maybe go for that.
All right.
I'm still a little stuck on the idea that, like, we can predict one way or the other, because, like, the Canizares point always looms in my head that you could play every single minute of every single game, be fully fit, and then drop a cologne bottle on your foot, break a metatarsal, and you're done with the tournament. So I think kind of like worrying about injuries, I understand where Joe comes from, and I think, like, the managing of minutes makes a ton of sense. Worrying about player fatigue or re-injuring injuries or trying to come back too quickly are all valid concerns, but at the same time, we just can't know. So I think if you're maybe having fewer competitions for players who are historically injured and playing in physical leagues, I get that one. But I also share the idea that I like Americans in the Champions League. It makes covering that league more enjoyable and gives us new wrinkles to look at and watch for. And so I'm not sure I would give that up to have a fully fit squad or the theoretical guarantee of a fully fit squad for the World Cup, even though we wouldn't actually even have that guarantee.
There will be an injury, at least one, to a key player for the US. It's just Joe mentioned, like, the last World Cup.
Oh, there will be.
Graham's going to make it happen.
I'll do what needs to be done, folks.
Yeah, Joe.
Graham's a big Jeff Galooly guy.
Get the bubble wrap out. You're going to need it. No, like, the last World Cup was an anomaly for the US. I can't imagine there were many other teams that basically had no injuries. I think of England at the last Euros, like Luke Shaw doesn't play until the final. Like Scotland, my own experience at the last Euros are basically decimated with injuries for the last Euros. So there will be one or two players that are missing for the US. That's just the reality of it. You just need to respond to what gets thrown up.
Well, no, also, sorry, maybe I'm going to go back to what Taylor said. I'm not like guaranteeing that these guys are going to get injured. I guess like Graham is if they play, 2-3 games a week, right? Like,
I think.
I think it's completely reasonable and like fair to say that if these guys are playing, an absurd amount of games like we see at the top level of European soccer, there's a greater likelihood of them getting injured. I'm not predicting that that's going to happen. I'm not predicting that somebody's not going to drop a cologne bottle on their foot tomorrow. All I'm saying is that it seems like it is more likely for injuries to happen if you're playing every game and you're playing 60 games a club season than if you're playing 40. That's all. And I think it would be hard to disagree with that.
Graham's like, nice metatarsal. There'd be a real shame if something dropped.
Real shame if something happened to that.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on US players who play in red and black stripes domestically and elsewhere. Kevin Tolley, thank you very much indeed. Taylor, what was that?
Sorry, I had one more question. I was finally able to look at my notes for this one. My only other point I had was, if we talk about the U.S. not having international experience or like enough international experience, enough sort of high-level competition experience, playing in the Champions League, especially if you make the knockout rounds, does give you opportunities where you are playing very good opposition and you have to execute your game plan and you have to respond to adversity. And there is maybe a trade-off there, in my mind, that you have a higher risk of getting injured if you're playing more games. At the same time, there's an argument that European competition does maybe better prepare you emotionally, mentally, like for those major knockout round competitions if the U.S. is able to make it to the knockout round of the World Cup. So that is the other little point I thought was worth noting. Now back to editing.
Now all we need is somebody to actually get minutes in the Champions League knockout rounds.
Well, there's that, Joe.
Hey,
you know what?
CCB.
You know what? You got a cologne bottle coming your way if you're not careful.
Oh, no.
All right.
I'm
Kevin,
scared.
once again, thank you very much for your question. AJ on the Discord comes in here. In order for Wrexham to maximise US-based marketing, which I guess is an objective, it's obvious they should bring in an active USMNT player next season based on their current squad. What player or players should they Target. Ooh, Graham, good question here. Wrexham likely going to need to staff up for the championship. A few candidates from the US pool, perhaps, who could head their way? What do you think?
So I've got 2 candidates. So one of them, let's put Busio in that central midfield. These are relatively realistic, right? I'm not going to say like Pulisic or whatever. And Wrexham have been promoted, but they're still going to be in the championship, and there is a chance that they might be like a bottom half championship. I know they've won 3 promotions in a row, but at some point they are going to find it tougher, and I think this might be it. So there's a chance they'll be in the bottom half of the championship. So I've tried to go a little bit realistic. So Busio can go in that central midfield. He can go in alongside Ollie Rathbone and Matty James. He will play in basically like the same system that he plays in for Venezia with a back 3 and then midfield 3. And also Venezia look like they're going down, and the Championship is a stronger league than Serie B, so you could sell it to him on that basis. I think my real answer, though, is John Tolkien.
Yeah, it is.
Who I know just got a move, but equally, Hulse and Kiel are going down. They pretty much are down at this point. And the way that Wrexham play, they use wing-backs, they want high and wide players on that side. That could work for Tolkien. But the real reason I want Wrexham to sign him is he would be TV gold. He was gold in the Onside MLS docuseries along with our very own Joe Lowry, another star of that show. And I think Wrexham fans would love John Tolkien. He'd be the one that they put in the next Deadpool movie. It would be Paul Mullen and Ollie Palmer would be gone, and it would be John Tolkien in that movie, in that movie for Wrexham. So yeah, let's make it happen.
Yeah, John Tolkien I think it is the answer to this question. I don't know if it would actually happen for the reasons you mentioned, Graham, about him having just moved, but he would be docuseries gold, and we already have proof of that. I mean, John Tolkien's got other stuff going on, but he would be an entertaining figure that would draw eyeballs for sure, or keep eyeballs there. I think that's a great shot. When Graham started naming Wrexham players and like their structure and shape, I realized how out of my depth I am to answer this question as thoroughly as Graham. So I'm kind of tempted just to pack it in right there. I have one other name. I have other names, but I have another one that I think is somewhat compelling. Cade Cowell, who would cost way too much for Wrexham to actually buy from Chivas, because Chivas just spent a bunch of money on him. And he's produced a little bit for Chivas as well. Not a lot, but a little bit. The guy's just built for the Champo, isn't he? Like he's like 8 feet wide and 6 feet tall, and I mean he is like the American Adama Traore. Like I don't know, it just feels like he is perfectly built for the slog that is the 67 game championship season and the play style that is the EFL championship. So Cade Cowell feels like a move that would actually be legitimately good for Wrexham, and then I could kind of see it. And I think you could, from a marketing perspective, I think you could do some damage there too.
It's amazing to me that you all have claimed to have the answer when neither one of you has mentioned the actual answer. First, a bit of prelude. If Tim Ream still played for Fulham, he would be the answer, because he is very much a Wrexham signing, like 37, 38, Premier League experience. We get him into maybe a lower level, but he'll be just fine. But he does not play for Fulham anymore. Gio Reyna would be really interesting, because he is a name who needs minutes, but I don't know if he's going to make Wrexham better, and I'm not sure he is going to love his time at Wrexham, and I also don't know how great he's going to be on camera. But Matt Turner is the answer, no?
That was my answer.
I mean, you can make it a redemption arc. He's got to rediscover his form. Can he rediscover his form? But Wrexham are going to face some shots. He's going to get opportunities to put together a highlight reel, and I doubt that it's Phil Parkinson, right? The manager? I doubt Phil Parkinson has ever wanted his keeper mucking about with possession, so he wouldn't have to worry about that one either. So I feel like he gets minutes, he starts a bunch, he's maybe in a Deadpool movie as well, and he redeems himself in narrative form.
Yeah, Graham and I went for entertaining people, and you went for Matt Turner. That's the difference.
Wow,
that's all it is.
Shots fired at Matt Turner by Joe Lowry.
I'm just saying, we went for the marketing plays. Matt Turner is a great answer. He's on my
Richmond
list as well.
Kickers legend, Matt
and
Turner.
And a lovely guy. He just doesn't have the same charisma that John Tolkien and the same aura that Cade Cowell have. He's Matt Turner, like he's lovable in his own way.
If he can start a YouTube channel like Ben Foster did when he signed for Wrexham, then maybe he could fit the bill.
That's how you need to muck around for a Phil Parkinson player. You need to have a YouTube channel rather than mucking around with playing out from the back.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
Matt Turner gets frostbite playing for the U.S., and he's not entertaining enough for Joe. That's what the takeaway of this episode should be.
The other one that I would be intrigued to see would be Josh Sargent. It wouldn't be my first pick. Like I shut down Ryan on the floor and Balogun thing because I think Balogun, his level is just like, I think it really is higher. This was days ago. We were talking about this.
Okay.
I think his level is higher. And I think
also
the same.
like to imagine a fictional Ryan points so I can shut them down. That's how I spend my time.
Billy Gilmore is great, despite what Ryan says. I think Balogun's level is above that. And I think the same for Josh Sargent. But if the guy is just going to be stuck in the Champo, you might as well get him to someplace that's going to be interesting and that we're going to be clued in a little bit more on than at Norwich. So he's on the fringes of my list as well. Aiden Morris as well. He's already in the championship, and I think would do pretty well in the docuseries in addition to being an asset on the field. Not that I think they could probably pry either Aiden Morris or Josh Sargent away from their current teams.
All right. AJ, thank you very much indeed for your question. We take a quick break. When we come back, many more listener questions. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to our listener questions. Brett Miller's been in touch and asks, in the past, it's been discussed on the show that generally a top-level men's club side is better than a top-level men's national side. After making a point to watch more women's club soccer this season, I feel that equation might be switched, where a top-level national team for women is better than a top-level club side for the women's side. What do we think about this one? Taylor, do you have thoughts on this? I'm inclined to say surely not, but maybe there's a point here.
I think this has been the case until recently. I do think because there's so much less money in the women's game, or there has been historically, when you put a national team together, that is where you get at least some higher level of funding, and you're getting a larger pool of talent condensed into a smaller group that usually plays a bunch of matches together, because that's how you can kind of sustain women's soccer. It's similar to what the men's team did in the early 90s, and why all those guys have a million caps. It's why a lot of the women's team has so many caps. But I do think with more teams spending more money on the women's game, with leagues developing and getting stronger, I think it's probably starting to flip the other way, or maybe already has at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Taylor. You said that very, very well. There just aren't as many top teams in the women's game that are flushed with cash relative to their competition in the women's game, again, as there are in the men's game. And so there aren't as many women's club teams that are just stacked with elite players who play for, I don't know, top 5, top 10 national teams in the world like there are in the men's game, right? We could rattle off team after team after team at the top of the men's game where they're just stacked with elite talent from those top national teams because they hoover up all the players. And in the women's game, those players are either super highly concentrated at one club, in the case of FC Barcelona, who are the best club team in the world on the women's side, or they're spread out right across the NWSL. Now, the rise of the top tier in England, of some of those clubs taking women's soccer more seriously, has altered the landscape, I think, a little bit, and you got to that well, Taylor. I don't think it is quite as simple as it's Barca, it's the NWSL, and it's nothing else, right? The top of England is quite good nowadays. You also have Lyon. There's other teams in there, top of Germany, but in a general sense, the landscape is just different, which I think means that if you were to have a national team taking on, you draw a top 10 national team out of a hat and a top 10 club team out of a hat, the national team, I think, would have a better chance on the women's game because the top level club teams just aren't quite, by and large, aren't quite as stacked as they are on the men's side. The underlying component, though, to all this, and the reason why we talk about club soccer being better on the men's side than international soccer, which is Ryan Bailey's drum to beat, and I'm here for it. Like there's a tactical and like training and cohesion component to all of this. On the men's side, you could have France playing PSG, two absurdly talented teams. PSG are going to dominate. Like you watch PSG play soccer, and they are on the same page. They're cohesive. They're flowing. They're rotating together. In international soccer, it's just really hard to do that stuff. It's really hard to play an effective, dominant tactical style at that level because you don't have the time to train it into the players. On the women's side, that problem still exists. Like you don't get around that, even though, say, the U.S. women's national team plays more games than the USMNT. That doesn't totally solve your problem relative to your competition. That, I think, is still where the biggest difference is that the national teams, in terms of the quality of play they can deliver, are just almost never going to be at the same level of the club teams because they're in a totally different context.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Graham?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far, in particular what Taylor said right at the top. I think that pretty much nailed it. What I would say is, like, the flip point is, I think it's the same scenario as the men's game in that the best club teams are better than the best international teams. So, like, Joe's already rung off a load of them, like Barcelona, even Chelsea, Lyon, Arsenal. I'm not as familiar with some of the NWSL teams as well, but I have to imagine, like, Orlando Pride, Washington Spirit are up there as well. I think you could list I mean, I'm just plucking a number out of thin air here, but like you could probably list about like 50 club teams that are possibly better than the best international teams, and I think that flip point is much higher, meaning like I think you could get to 10 in the women's game, and then you start to get some of the really powerful international teams that are better. And I think like Scotland is a good example of that, where the women's national team would absolutely demolish every domestic team in Scotland. We've got good players like Caroline Weir and Erin Cuthbert, who are genuinely like global superstars. Kim Little was one of the best central midfielders in the women's game for a long time. If you look at the men's game, the men's national team probably lose to Celtic, maybe even Rangers. So the flip point, as I'm calling it, is I think much higher in the women's game.
All right, Brett Miller, thank you very much indeed for your question. We go now to Peter Shark, who's been in touch via the Discord, and says, after Victor Osimhen, Kim, and then Kavara O'Donnell were sold, I assume Napoli were picked apart and might be done. Now, here they are. Was this good business? If so, was it intentional, or have they lucked themselves into this good position? It's a very good question, Graham. Have they Antonio Conte'd themselves into this position to a certain extent?
To a certain extent, I think he has moulded a team. I think back to last summer, and he was very unhappy, as his pattern and his habit. He was very unhappy with the transfers, and everything that I've read says that the transfers that they made last summer were apparently dictated by Conte, and 3 in particular have really pointed this team in the right direction. That's been Journo, it's Lukaku, and it's McTominay. And then there's others that have contributed as well. Fratini, yeah. There's others as well that have contributed. Neres, Gilmore's contributed. Spinazzola, I think, has been good as well. But those 3 felt like Conte getting his core together, and that allowed him to settle the 3 outfield areas of the team, right? He settles with those 3 signings. He does a lot to settle the defence, the midfield, and the attack. And so I do think a lot is actually on Conte with this team. I think my answer to Peter's question differs depending on the 3 players that we're talking about, right?
Yep.
So with Kim Min-jae, I think that retrospectively looks like a decent bit of business. They got 50 million euros for him. They sold him when his stock was high after winning the Scudetto. He's not been great for Bayern Munich. I think you can see his flaws playing for a team that plays on the halfway line. And this summer, or last summer I should say, I've already mentioned his name, but Napoli went and invested some of that money they got in Alessandro Buongiorno, who has been great, got him from Torino. And as a unit, Napoli are the best defensive side in Serie A at the moment. We talk about Inter Milan in the Champions League. Well, Napoli have conceded like quite notably fewer goals than them this season in Serie A. With Osimhen, they botched that whole situation, so I do not have much positivity to say about that. They had a player who would have commanded like 80 million euros plus even in the transfer market last summer. There was interest in him. Chelsea wanted him. Saudi Arabian clubs wanted him, and they played hardball to such an extent that they loaned him out to Turkey for a season. And I now think Napoli will be lucky to get that same fee that they would have got 12 months ago. They'll probably sell him this summer.
Right? They reduced the release clause, right? Down from like 120 to like 75. So yeah, already I think they're signifying they recognize that maybe they're not going to get the full amount of money they could have gotten otherwise.
And the reporting that I've seen, he will probably move this summer, and he'll probably join a top-level club in one of the big 5 leagues. But the money that I've seen reported or mentioned with relation to that transfer is like 50, 60 million, which is a big decrease in what they would have got from a year ago. So they botched that situation. And then Kvaratskhelia, I think you can look at it 2 ways. They did get a big fee for him, 80 million euros from PSG, I've read, once you include the add-ons, which apparently are fairly achievable. But they sold him mid-season when they were chasing a Scudetto and didn't really have the opportunity to replace him properly. So even that deal felt like it put Napoli in a difficult position. And you now have a series of managers. De Laurentiis would probably point to the fact that Napoli are likely, at this point, I don't want to jinx anything, but are likely to win their second Scudetto in 3 years. He'd point to that as justification for what he's doing. But we now have a series of managers at Napoli who have pointed to the transfer business, who have complained about the transfer business. Of course, Spalletti is a hero for that club, and he leaves a few days after they win the Scudetto. So there is a pattern here, and I think I'm leaning towards Napoli lucking themselves into this situation over anything that is planned.
Yeah, I kind of trend in a similar direction, or at the very least, I didn't expect Napoli to survive this in the way that they have not just survived, but actually thrived. Selling clubs, and Napoli are a selling club, right? They're not the top of the funnel in European soccer. They sell their best players, so they're a selling club. Those teams go through cycles, and I think there are 4 steps in the cycle. I was thinking about this yesterday. The first step is Your team manages to sign a bunch of great players who turn into stars. Either by luck, you find them, or great scouting department, you find them. Napoli maybe trend towards one side of that coin or the other, depending on the day. The second phase of the cycle is they win things because they sign great players. Then the third phase is they sell those players for big money because they need money, and Napoli need money. All of Serie A needs money. Everybody in soccer needs money, except for the state-owned clubs. Then the fourth stage of this process is they stop winning things. So you go through, you sign a bunch of players that turn out to be stars, you win things, you sell them because you need money, and then you stop winning things. Napoli went through the first three stages of that cycle. They signed Osimhen, they signed Kvardana, they signed Kim. They win the title, then they sell two of those guys, as we've already dictated, for like a combined 130 million, and then botch the Osimhen thing. But they're still going to get, let's say, another 50 million out of that. That's a lot of cash for three players, even if it was not optimal along the way. They had bad results last year. I don't want to forget that. But I think this year's title push makes it pretty clear that they didn't fully sink into that fourth stage of on-field failure. And even last year, they hadn't fully sold those players yet. Like, Kvardana's still around, Osimhen's still around. They just didn't perform at quite the same level. So I don't fully understand how Napoli have managed to skip that fourth stage now that they have parted ways effectively with all three of those players. They've done good business, as Graham's already detailed. Like, Lukaku has been useful. McSauce has been massive for them. It's a weird situation. Like, I predicted that Inter were going to win the title, and now I look a bit silly. I didn't think Napoli were going to be in this position, so credit to them for that. A credit to them for signing, some really impactful players, as Graham's already detailed, and shout out to them for just skipping that fourth step. That's the way to be.
Yeah. Yep, I agree with everything that's been said. Also, the show is published. But on the point of this question, I agree with the points you all are making. I think Napoli tend to do the best job of a lot of clubs, at least, in terms of spending wisely, rebuilding wisely, and then dealing with unexpected hiccups, even if they are self-inflicted hiccups, as best you can. Because I look at, say, buying Kalidou Koulibaly for 7 million euros, you flip him, I guess flip when you sell him like 8 years later is maybe not flipping necessarily, but you sell him for 42 million, you replace him with Kim Min-jae that same season for 19 million euros, you sell him a season later for 50 million, and then you sit on that, you kind of play with what you have, and then this summer they signed Buongiorno, which, by the way, Graham, I don't know how you say that name flat. I think you should be obligated to say Buongiorno. So,
with the hand gesture.
Make that mistake next time. Buongiorno. And so I think in that way that you see kind of responsible appraisal. They're not going crazy. They're not like even getting kind of like bilked for more money the way you would expect, which is a thing that happened once they have the Kvardana money. Everybody is then like, well, you've made all this money. Now we can add another 10 or 15 to every single price tag. And I think they walk away from deals that would have worked for them because they're not going to be kind of extorted for additional income or additional amounts. But like, I think bringing in David Neres is a decent enough replacement or a decent idea that you need some kind of like quality out wide. And I think they tend to replace key players really intelligently. I mean, even with how well Lukaku has looked this year, I didn't think that would be the best signing. I didn't think he would be as successful as he's been. But I think they do generally pretty smart business and have a pretty good recruitment system because they also managed to find players like Kvardana that I don't think anybody else was looking at.
Indeed. And it's probably important to note as well the Napoli wage structure. Like they're fairly stringent with that, right? So Kvardana was on like something like 40k,
except for Osimhen, who I think was on 13 million a year.
Yeah, that's an exception, I guess.
Which is, I think, like to what Joe and Graham already pointed out, like he is the outlier. That is the mistake they made of giving him that new deal for an insane amount of money that no one was ever going to meet, and that's why they can't move him on. Is because he wants that same wage wherever he goes, and so you end up basically lucking into the Turkish Super League having an extended transfer window. Otherwise, he's probably still sitting on the bench for Napoli and being annoyed, but collecting a check. So. That one is the weird one.
Like that whole they passed the threshold of registering him, so he wouldn't unless they registered him again in January. He would have missed the first half of the season, and then Galatasaray come along and take him on loan. But it was a farce last summer with what happened with Osimhen. Like that should have been a slam dunk, massive sale for Napoli.
There you go. Well, Napoli are 3 points ahead in the Scudetto race with 4 games to go as we record. So it's all to play for. Between Inter and Napoli. We shall see how that one goes. Peter Shark, thank you very much indeed for your question. We take one more quick break. Then we talk about clubs finding their level and stifling creative type players. Back shortly. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to our listener questions. Richard Rolson has been in touch. I love those alliterative R's. Can't get enough of them, Richard. While every club dreams of promotion and fears relegation, do you think there's an equilibrium for certain clubs to grow to a certain league level? Where some clubs, due to the size of their community, their stadium and other factors, should be at a League One or a Championship level, and success for them is to attain and sustain that level. It's Taylor, it's an interesting question because I kind of agree with much of the spirit of it. Like,
I think I do. Some of the words confused me.
Well, like a club like Millwall in the Championship, I would say, who've never been. They were a first division team like 80s and before that, never been in the Premier League. I would argue for them, their level, their equilibrium, is the Championship. They might. There's a chance they could go up, actually, depending how the last weekend goes. But that kind of club, it feels like they're not a Premier League team. Their equilibrium, for them, success is maintaining that. I'd argue Wimbledon, the team I support, our equilibrium, our level is probably, based on the size of the club and very much based on the budget of the club, is the fourth tier. So that was where I say, not necessarily a ceiling is, but that's the level. But then you get outliers like Luton, who jump through the levels, who have a small stadium, who you could argue by the metrics of on the face of it, it's unsustainable for them to be a Premier League team, arguably. But their level is the Premier League at this point, so it's a bit of a nuanced question, I think, but one that's worth exploring, Taylor.
I think so, and I think I understood this largely the way you took it, with the idea that there are basically. Is it the case that some clubs just are championship clubs, are League One clubs, and aren't really going to move above that? And if they do, maybe don't have the resources or financial capability or know-how to kind of operate at that level, do some clubs just sort of succeed by staying in the level in which they have become accustomed? I think there's probably some truth to that. And I do think that you talk to club fans of smaller clubs, and really this extends to the Premier League. Do Brentford fans realistically, supporters, excuse me, English people, before you get mad at me. Do Brentford supporters truly believe that they're going to win the Premier League? Do they think they're going to finish top four? No, I don't think that that's a thing that they expect to happen. I think there is always a glimmer of hope, and that's what, to me, Pro Rel offers, in a broader sense. But there's a hope that maybe we finish in a European place. Maybe we beat Manchester City. And that is kind of what I think is the aspirational limit for some supporters. But once you do find yourself, if you kind of have managed to put things together and you are having a strong season and you do get promoted, I think that's the beauty of Pro Rel, and I think that's where the financial benefits that come with getting promoted allow you to choose how you're going to reinvest that, and maybe it is to buy players to try to stay alive right now, but maybe, as Burnley have done and Luton have done, you reinvest that into your facilities and your infrastructure so that you can then have better facilities and infrastructure, so then you do kind of belong at that level, or maybe you move from being a mid-table championship club to a yo-yo club, and you're moving up and moving down, but you're still able to use that money and reinvest it. I think there is always some level of aspiration, even if the season doesn't begin with a club thinking, we're definitely getting promoted, it's promotion or nothing. I think you still always have that glimmer of hope that you might, even if you were a tiny club. I think everybody wants to believe one day they could win the Premier League, or at least make it to the Premier League.
Yeah, money has a really good way of sorting things out to their level, right? Where you look at the big stadiums, right? The stadiums of clubs that can afford to have bigger stadiums or expand.
Joe's a tech billionaire, by the way. We should.
And I found my level. I mean, I think it's very clear. You look at the stadium size. You look at transfer expenditure. You look at salaries. Generally speaking, the teams with more stuff are higher up the table, right? It does sort of sort itself, just like the transfer market does a pretty good job of sorting players to their level. The amount of assets and the amount of money that teams have, that does a pretty good job too. Wrexham is a great example of a team that previously had an equilibrium, that had found their level, which was not being a very good team in the context of the larger pyramid. And all of a sudden, they are surging into the championship, and the difference there is cash. So if you have a lot of money to spend, if suddenly Wimbledon gets taken over by, I don't know, pick another movie star here, they too can do what Wrexham has done. If you have the cash to go out there and splash and transform your club, you can completely topple your equilibrium. But I think in general, there is totally something to this. Generally speaking, the big clubs that spend money are at the top of the pyramid, and I know this is super obvious. The ones that don't and have nothing are at the bottom. Like Burnley is one example that I came to me looking through the table, or looking through the stadium sizes, for the top 4 leagues in England. Burnley being at Turf Moor, they seat 21,000 people in their stadium. That puts a real cap on how much money they can generate from things like ticket sales or from hosting other events there, whatever it is. How big the crowds are obviously is impacted by that. What kind of players want to go there as well is impacted. Ryan, if you want to do a thing about Burnley and England and north of London, you're welcome. Whatever you want to do.
I've got it in the chamber. Yeah.
Cool. All right. No worries. Those conditions point to Burnley being a team that has trouble really establishing themselves in the Premier League. There are so many other teams with more resources and with a more beneficial set of cards than Burnley. Their level is by and large being a fringe Premier League team at the moment, where they are a yo-yo club. I think Taylor, you talked about that as well. Now, there can be Brentfords, where Brentford have the 53rd largest stadium in the EFL. And yet they are a pretty good team. They're a mid-table Premier League team over and over and over again. So this is not a one-size-fits-all situation, but it is an absolutely a general rule that there is an equilibrium, I think, for every club. And by and large, they are sorted appropriately across the pyramid.
Graham, your thoughts on this one? Maybe you could even talk about the equilibrium within a league itself, like a certain clubs in the Premier League in that 15th to 18th or 15th to 17th, 14th to 17th kind of area. Newcastle maybe are not at their equilibrium because of the wealth they have, the size of the stadium they have, the size of the support they have. They're below it, arguably, right?
That last point you make about Newcastle is why I kind of struggle with the premise of this question, because equilibriums can change depending on the factors you feed into it, right? Yep. And I just think the nature of promotion and relegation means that, for example, Ryan, you said Wimbledon you think your equilibrium is what, League Two?
Yeah.
You said?
Yeah.
You've previously been in the Premier League though, right? So previously you wouldn't have thought that. You would have... Yeah. But the club it's the same club. I know there's some
the sadness in Ryan's eyes right now is actually making me so sad.
But the point I'm making is just depending on, and you're right, Joe, I don't disagree with anything really you're saying. Money does tend to dictate the table, but there are clubs who break free from that. Brentford broke free from that, not by spending huge amounts of money, but by kind of going down the data-driven route, and Brighton have done similar things. And so I just struggle to put an equilibrium on each club for that reason. I look at Stirling Albion, we're in League Two at the moment. I hope that one day we'll consider our equilibrium to be like the Championship or something like that, because we are a club that could feasibly, we've watched Queen's Park get up to the Championship recently. So I think that's why I just struggle with this. And also I've been in a situation where a club wins promotion against the odds and they overachieve, and it is not in the nature of fans to think, it's a success for us to maintain being here. Fans always want more. Like you're saying, Brentford, Taylor, Brentford can't win the title. I think that's true. I don't think any of their fans expect that. But you better believe this season there's been discussion among their fans about, could we get into the Champions League conversation? Could we get into European football? That's just the way a fan's mentality works. So, yeah, I think I struggled with this one a little bit more than the rest of it.
I like to picture the Brentford fans all turning to each other no, lads, we're so lucky to be here, guys. We are. I mean, man, thank data that we made it to this point in the first place. We're really, really fortunate.
Equilibrium just means balance, right? More or less.
I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounded like.
I was wondering if anybody was going to firmly say yes or no, because we have never used that word. In the history of this show, I don't think we've said that word as much as we've said it in this specific episode.
Cream gets a lot more run than Equilibrium.
A little bit. I don't know why we're all referencing a Christian Bale movie from 2002,
Cream
but
does
here we are.
It's the Prince song.
Yep.
So you're telling me you all don't have any particular feeling when supporters are called fans? Because that is genuinely a thing that British people have corrected me on in the past. You Americans are fans. We're supporters.
Nope, I've never heard of that before. I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but we use fans and supporters interchangeably.
Well, it was Joe who did it, so Joe in your face. It was not.
Well, these are the only two British people I hang out with. I said sort of a matter of policy, so
that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, the quota's met. And my final question to just take up more time, Ryan, if you did have a celebrity come in and buy AFC Wimbledon, which I don't think you would want in the first place, but if you did, who are you going for? Is it Clooney?
Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi. Wow,
that's a great pick.
just as fashionable in pop culture as Ryan Reynolds.
Hello, fellow club owners. How do you do?
That's good. I like that.
And that's it. That's the answer. All answers. Well done, Ryan Bailey.
You're welcome. And well done, Richard Rolson, for that question. Thank you very much indeed. One more for this episode from Tyler Kinchella, who says, do manager systems with heavy emphasis on positional play and control through possession ruin individual creative type players? Thinking of Grealish, Doku, etc. at Man City, or Palmer, Madueke at Chelsea. It's Joe, it's an interesting question whether, I suppose, luxury players or, creative, skilled players can thrive in those kind of systems. We can probably point to circumstances where they have, even if Grealish had to be rewired at some point.
Yeah,
broken, if you will.
Yeah, broken down. Just one page of encyclopedic reading after the next. I don't think so. Like I don't really agree. There are parts of this that I kind of agree, and I'll get to that in a second. But generally, I don't think so. Even just the examples that Tyler gives, I don't think holds much water at all. Frankly, Jack Grealish went from being the guy at Villa to not being the guy at City. His numbers take a hit. His role has to change, not just because of the tactical change from an Aston Villa team to a Pep-led Man City team, but really because all of a sudden he was like the 8th best player on that team, and his everything around Jack Grealish changed, and so he was going to have to change too, just like anybody in that position would have. Jeremy Doku, I don't think of as being a super creative player, at least not in a traditional sense. He is much more dribbling and speed than he is about picking out a pass, and maybe I'm just not great with my definition of creativity there. Cole Palmer's had 2 really great seasons at Chelsea, so I don't really know what the problem is there with Cole Palmer. When I watch good possession teams play, I see creative players doing creative things. Pedri is a wizard at Barcelona, and the fact that his team dominates the ball means that he gets more chances to do wizardy things. Lamine Yamal is absurd. We talked about that on yesterday's show. Like, it's unbelievable the things that he does in a team that utterly just has a chokehold on the ball in basically every game. Vitinha and Fabian Ruiz at PSG, and these teams are just top of mind right now. But even if you want to go back further, Kevin De Bruyne at City. I don't think anybody's saying that Pep Guardiola stifled Kevin De Bruyne at Manchester City. I think there can be a risk of structuring the game to death at youth level. And I'm working on, I'm working on something about Diego Luna right now. And so I've been chatting to some people that have coached him over the years. And I think there is something to the idea that if you're a player that's kind of had to graft your way through some of the levels, and if you have an upbringing where, maybe you're the younger brother in a family, and like you've got to scrap and fight, and I think there is something to that, right? Of the unstructured, just going out there and playing and fighting and having sort of that not so vanilla, sterilized soccer upbringing. I think that stuff can help. But also, you look at the players that France and England and some of these countries are bringing through, and these guys are geniuses. Like they're soccer artists. Like MLS right now, Miles Lewis-Skelly is just absurd on the field, and he plays in a super structured team. So I don't think I agree with this. I just think there's a lot of bad teams that try to use the ball, and then their players don't do a lot of cool stuff. But I think the creative player is alive and well, frankly.
Joe, if you could, how would you define positional play for people who are new to it or just need kind of a refresh?
Yeah, I think systems with a heavy emphasis on spacing and positioning. So if you're a positional play team, and I try not to use this term because I think it is a little confusing. If you're a positional play team, you're probably going to dominate the ball. You're being very careful not to have multiple players in the same vertical line. You want to have your players sort of staggered and spread, for the most part, across the width of the field to have varied lines of both vertical and horizontal depth. It's just to have good spacing, to make good passing angles, to be available off the ball. If one player moves inside, the other player moves outside as a counterbalance. It's the kind of thing that you see from almost every good non-Real Madrid team in the world, honestly.
Maybe I am going too rigid then with the interpretation of positional play, because I do sort of agree with the idea that Tyler is getting at here. And I think it's because I think a lot of it has to do with how you define creativity. And I think that in and of itself, like you said, Jeremy Doku, like is being really fast and taking people on with your speed creative, or is that just utilizing an asset versus maybe being slower but picking out those passes? But I think what I kind of keep going back to is the idea that, like, if you are not supposed to be in the same vertical plane, or you're exceeding the number of players that are supposed to be there, but you, the number 10, the historic playmaker, know, oh, this is where I need to be. I feel like I need to be there. This is an opportunity where I can take this guy on. You're going to get screamed at by Pep. You're going to get yelled at by Arteta because you are now moving into a space that you're not supposed to be. You are throwing off the balance. And I think that is where I do kind of buy into the idea that if you are sort of being drilled to play a certain way on the basic level that you can then make your own and you can interpret on your own, there is some stifling of creativity because you're playing within a structured system. But at the same time, and I think this is where I agree with what Joe is saying, there can then still be individual expression. Miles Lewis Skelly can still take people on. It is Miles Lewis Skelly, right? I keep wanting to call him Keen Lewis Potter, but that's a different person. There's too many hyphenates. The point is, you can still have individual creativity. And what I keep going to is something like if you are acting in a play, that is still individual creativity because you have the individual moments where you can emote a certain way or you can deliver a line a certain way. But it is still written by somebody else. There is still structure there that you have to follow. You're not doing improv. I don't know if I could do 90 minutes of full-form improv viewing, but I could watch a play. And so there's creativity there, but it's within a structure. And I think that is sort of what the debate is how much structure is useful before it starts to stifle the individual ability to kind of play your own way and find space and interpret the game your own way.
That is the best analogy, Taylor, I think we've had on the show in a long... I love that analogy so much. I think that is so apt. I 100% think that the play versus improv thing is spot on, and you can still have that individual expression. Like, if you have a little bit of a script to work through, it's not going to be a train wreck. Like, you're going to have some guidance on how you want to go about stuff, and the truly great actors will use that as a platform to do the stuff that makes them truly great, rather than having to improv their way through everything. There will always be room for some of that stuff, right? Like, there was Dembele goal for PSG the other day. Him dropping in, that's not necessarily this huge scripted thing, although PSG did pull off that exact same goal against Liverpool in the round of 16, but that's neither here nor there. Like, these players do still have a feel for the game, and I think maybe it's a bit overstated that Pep or Arteta would, like, scream at these guys for taking a couple of steps deeper to pick up the ball. I think that those players are empowered to make those kinds of decisions, and you see it with the fluidity of teams in the modern game where formations really are, like, not even very useful anymore to describe how these positional play, possession teams play because they are so fluid. I just struggle to think of a creative player that's gone to a team where he's going to have a regular role, or she's going to have a regular role, and has just been stifled by a system. Maybe it's happened. I don't think there are a lot of examples of it.
Don't we talk about that with City, though? How it takes like a year to be able to like fully function in Pep's system because it is so demanding and has such intricacy? I ask that to then say, like, I think that is a difference to me, and maybe I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm painting with too broad of a brush, but I think there are managers, like, and I know Pep Guardiola would not agree with this, like, categorization, but I think there are managers where their philosophy is the foundation, and that as long as you are executing their game plan, you can have creativity, you can have individual decision-making and flair, but fundamentally you have to be doing what they have drilled you to do. And then I think of somebody like Carlo Ancelotti, who has a game plan and has tactics. We sometimes oversimplify that he doesn't. He has tactics, but I think those tactics allow for more individual creative expression. You go out and figure out how to beat that guy. That's not my job. And that, I think, is also part of this, is that some managers are perceived as being essentially dictators, and some are being perceived as almost laissez-faire. And I think that oversimplifies drastically what managers are actually doing, but I think that's where some of this idea comes from, and it's a thing that I struggle with a little bit.
I do think it's a fair point with Jack Grealish. He's pretty much the only player I can think of. Like, the players that were listed there, like Jeremy Doku, I think of. Joe, you were, when you were listing players, you were listing players like kind of deeper players. I took this question to mean like kind of like attacking difference makers. So like Doku, when you mentioned PSG, you mentioned Fabian Ruiz. I was thinking of Dembele, to be fair. You mentioned him as well later. But I look at Grealish in the way that he's used for Man City, and I think Pep has always seen Grealish as someone he wants on the ball in front of a defence. He wants him to have lots of touches of the ball. Whereas for Villa, he essentially he had more freedom like Doku has to go one-on-one against defenders and get in behind. And so I do think there's a difference there. Whether that's down to system and approach rather than just how Pep Guardiola interprets an individual player, I don't know. But yeah, I think Grealish has kind of been stifled at Man City. A step up in quality has probably done it a little bit as well, to your point, Joe. But he does get used in a different way. Like, he was playing central midfield for Man City earlier this season. Like, that is absolutely not the role he was playing for Aston Villa. So I think that in itself tells you that Pep sees him as someone who he wants him on the ball a little bit more than maybe Villa, who wanted him to make the difference in the final third.
There you go. I think, are we in danger here of veering into a theological discussion on the nature of free will,
which is choice? Which is why I loved this question, and why also researching this question became way too big of a rabbit hole for me, because I got into like the theoretical advances in tactics and how right now teams are like each player is expected to have like 5 different potential avenues for attacking goal in any given attack, but how now that number needs to increase to 20, which is what some coaches are like writing about in their dissertations for their coaching courses about how to create so many multifaceted attacks that it's impossible to game plan for, which is essentially just unstructured attacking play at that point to then capitalize on what the opposition is doing or expects you to be doing. And it really does lead to the idea that everything is cyclical and that eventually we're just going to get into chaos ball where it's just like, you know what, just show up in unexpected areas and make stuff happen and we'll see how it goes. And then it's just 90s football all over again and we repeat the cycle.
Yeah. Bring it back.
Without Wimbledon in the Premier League.
Well, of course.
Sorry, Joe.
That'll never happen.
I just have a hard time to really zoom all the way out here. I have a hard time going along with this question when we are just watching PSG and Barcelona do the things that they're doing. Like that, honestly, that's kind of my whole argument is that possession creative soccer is thriving in a way that I just don't see how that fits with the premise here.
I heard and agree, and I think that those are two very interesting teams to point at because what I think I struggle with in terms of disagreeing with this question, basically, is watching PSG and seeing Luis Enrique screaming the entire game, watching Arsenal and seeing Mikel Arteta screaming the entire game. And it is, move here, go there, do this. It's all such I know where you need to be. It feels very, controlling, I guess, but that has a negative context. But it feels very much like you're not doing exactly what I need you to be doing in this exact moment. And that's where I do start to feel like if they're not exactly executing exactly as the mathematic brain tells them they should be, then they're at fault. But I look at Barcelona, and I think Hansi Flick is doing the best job I can think of balancing the two. There is clearly structure in how he wants them to attack, transition to defense, and defend. But there is obviously still a ton of freedom for creative expression and creative interpretation in there. Otherwise, Lamine Yamal isn't the player he is. So I kind of look at Hansi Flick as a manager that is finding a way to balance the two really effectively. Still screams a little bit on the sidelines, don't get me wrong, but is not Mikel Arteta, who runs more than some of his center backs run in an entire game.
All right. Tyler Kichella, thank you very much indeed for your questionnaire. Thank you to everybody who submitted one on this here episode. If you'd like to do so, TotalSoccerShow.com/questions, or you can access our Discord. How do you do that, you may ask? Refer back to the start of the show when I mentioned Patreon.com/TotalSoccerShow, where you can support us, please, and thank you. But for now, Taylor Robko, thank you very much for both editing and contributing during this last hour.
My pleasure. None of us have free will, which means we all have free will.
This feels very Donnie Darko. I like it. Very good.
It could be the other way around, too. We all have free will, so none of us have free will. I think it works both ways.
Oh, brain broken. Graham Rotherham, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan.
Joe Lowry, a pleasure as always, my good man.
Yeah, my mind went incredible. So if everyone's special, then no one will be. Shout out Syndrome. Thanks, Brian.
Wow. There we go. Listener, thank you very much for joining us on this episode. Have yourselves a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on the feed very shortly. But for now, bye.